Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for being here to witness and celebrate the signing of the Due Process for All Ordinance in San Francisco. And first, I'd like to commend Supervisor John Avalos for leading the charge against the ICE program known as Security Communities, and for your work, Supervisor, in bringing this important legislation to this body, before the board, and to the public. I also want to thank all the other supervisors as a whole, and I know all of them worked hard, spent a lot of time on this to think thoughtfully about the impacts and the changes that we were making. And I especially want to give particular thanks to Supervisor Tang and Supervisor Kim for offering amendments that ultimately strengthened the ordinance itself. I also want to give a very strong thank you to the numerous agencies that are involved in both public safety, but also the immigrant rights community, the immigrant advocates, many of whom are in the room today, including the groups that comprise the Immigrant Rights Defense Committee, which I had a chance to meet and discuss and hear the stories of victims who were getting tangled up with ICE detainers for simply trying to cooperate with our police department. I'm also glad to have the advice and presence of our police chief, Greg Sir, who's been a long-time supporter of our Sanctuary City Ordinance, and he also is the first chief in the state of California to support Assemblyman Amiano's Trust Act, which all of you have heard has been recently signed by Governor Brown. Thousands of our members of our limited English and immigrant communities, in fact, all of our communities, do live in constant fear of deportation, and they have distrusted our law enforcement officials even when they are victims of a violent crime. So here's the message that I would like to send by the signing of this ordinance, and I'm speaking particularly to our immigrant communities, that it is safe, absolutely safe, to call our police if you are a victim or a witness to a crime. While everybody involved in the process agreed that we needed to make a stand against the SCOM, the secure communities, I also asked that we retain some local flexibility to deal with violent felons. And while we compromised on that aspect of it, and we understood how complicated that was to be applied to every aspect that perhaps we had viewpoints on, we never lost sight that we needed to get rid of SCOM the way it has been crafted and exercised in our city. And so we do what I think other governments should do. We found the common ground and we kept focused on it. And so that is why I'm proud to be signing this ordinance with all of you in the room today. I'd like to take this opportunity to invite Supervisor John Avalos to speak of his leadership on this and what it's meant to him, his district, but also to the rest of the city. Supervisor Avalos.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I want to thank you for your work on this legislation. We met in early August to discuss this item, and I was very impressed with how much you had thought about the issue and thought about what the city was facing and how immigrants in San Francisco and around this country are what they're facing with the SCOM system. So you were also very brief, well with your staff on this legislation as well. I want to thank law enforcement as well for their input in crafting this legislation. In particular, would like to thank District Attorney George Gascon, the Sheriff Ross McCarimi, Chief Sir of the Police Department for your input in helping to craft this legislation. I also, most of all, I didn't so much bring this legislation forward as the San Francisco Immigrant Rights Defense Committee brought this legislation forward. I represent a district where about 50% of us are foreign-born, and so there are many people I speak to on the street who have experiences with immigration that are really unfair to the contributions that they're making here in San Francisco. But the organizing that was going on in the communities and the communication that was going on among our different immigrant rights communities was very, very strong. And actually passing this legislation and doing the advocacy for this legislation puts us at a much higher level, a stronger level to protect immigrants moving forward in the future. And the relationship we've built between government and our community is going to help really strengthen the work of our police efforts, and that's something that we could all expect that is going to make us all safer in this city. Most of all, I want to thank people like Nellie, who had actually got entangled as a victim, got entangled into our justice system, and later spent 8 months facing deportation proceedings in the Immigration Customs Enforcement Agency. And something that no one should have to face. No one should have to have any fear of calling the police because they're wondering if they're going to get deported or someone in their family will get deported. People should be able to come forward as victims or as witnesses to call the police. And this legislation helps to make that happen. As the mayor said, I really appreciate your message. No one here should have any fear again, if you're an immigrant, to call the police to ask for help, whether you're a victim or a witness. And that's what this legislation does. I want to thank my colleagues for your work and helping to get this passed. I do want to thank Supervisor Kim for helping to bring forward amendments that we could all agree on to help move this legislation forward. This legislation is based on the principle that everyone, regardless of your citizenship status, should have due process against the arbitrary denial of liberty. And that's a constitutional right. It's in our it's the Fifth Amendment of our Constitution, and we up here in San Francisco, we uphold that, and we say that our values should drive our policy. In this case, we've done that clearly. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I look forward to your signing on to this legislation.
All right. Shall we? All right. There it is. Done.